This video is brought to you by Roll for Combat, an official Paizo actual play podcast. Visit rollforcombat.com today to listen to Agents of Edgewatch and join Basil, Dougie, Gomez, and Lomang as they protect and serve the citizens of Absalom from a mysterious and diabolical plot. Hello and welcome to Attacks of Opportunity in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. The Attack of Opportunity is a feature for fighters at first level and may be gained through feats for most other martial classes. Despite differences in availability, they all function the same way. This ability allows characters to use their reaction to make a melee strike against an opponent who has dropped their guard. There are a few requirements to the trigger for this reaction. First, the enemy must be within your reach, meaning they must be close enough that you could strike them with your melee weapon. And second, one of the following must occur. The enemy uses a manipulate action, the enemy makes a ranged attack, the enemy uses a move action, or the enemy moves out of its square during a move action that it is using. If both of those criteria are met, being that the enemy is within range of your melee attack and performs one of those four triggering actions, then you may spend your reaction to make a melee strike against them. This strike is always made at your highest bonus without any multiple attack penalty, even if technically it may be your fourth attack made that round. That's what an Attack of Opportunity is, but let's take a closer look at each of its elements. First, the enemy must be within reach of your melee attack, and this would be whatever melee attack you have prepared at the moment, meaning it's either a weapon you're already holding or an unarmed attack. Any square that you could make a melee attack into is often referred to as your threatened area, or that you are threatening those spaces, and the enemy must be standing in a threatened space for you to use an Attack of Opportunity against them. Generally speaking, your threatened area will be the 8 squares immediately surrounding you. However, some weapons have the reach trait that allows them to attack enemies more than 1 square away. For example, halberds have the reach trait, which means they can attack enemies that are 10 feet away. And per the notation on page 455, this means they can attack enemies that are 2 squares away, including 2 squares diagonally. And although we're discussing this from a player's perspective, the same is true of many large monsters as well. So if you're wielding a warhammer, you threaten these spaces. If you're wielding a long spear, you threaten these spaces. If you're a hill giant, you threaten these spaces, and if you're a hill giant wielding a long spear, you threaten these spaces. As long as your enemy is occupying at least one of these spaces, they meet the first criteria for an Attack of Opportunity. Assuming at least part of the target is occupying a threatened space, the next question is, does the target meet one of the 4 triggering actions? The first of which is using a manipulate action. Any action that has the manipulate trait is considered to be a manipulate action. The manipulate trait notes any action that requires the user to physically interact with an object or make gestures. Probably the most common place you'll find this is with interact actions. Interact has the manipulate trait, meaning anything that calls for an interact action is also a manipulate action. A few common examples include reloading weapons, drawing a weapon or potion, fetching an item from storage, giving an item or taking an item from another character, opening a door, and changing the grip on your weapon from 1 hand to 2. But removing a hand and changing your grip from 2 hands to 1 is not an interact action, it's a release action. Another example would be activating items. Many but not all items require an interact action to use. For example, applying giant wasp venom to a dagger requires 2 interact actions, which would provoke Attacks of Opportunity. Also, most spells use manipulate actions as well. Each spell requires 1 or more spell components to cast, and 3 of the 4 components have the manipulate trait, the only exception being verbal. We should also note that one action that may feel like a manipulate action because it involves moving an item is strike. The strike action used to make attacks with weapons does not have the manipulate trait, and therefore melee attacks do not provoke Attacks of Opportunity. So the strike action itself does not provoke Attacks of Opportunity, but the second listed trigger is making a ranged attack. If you attempt to attack someone with a longbow while in the threatened space of an enemy that's capable of making attacks of opportunity, you could trigger that attack. And this applies to any ranged attack. Shooting a bow, throwing a dagger, or chucking an acid flask at someone all count as ranged attacks. And in this situation, you don't only trigger the attack of opportunity from the target of the attack, but from all enemies whose threatened space you're in. Ranged spell attacks also count, but there's a good chance that those spells are already covered by being manipulate actions as we've already discussed. The third possible trigger for attacks of opportunity is using a move action. If you use any action that has the move trait while standing in an enemy's threatened space, you might provoke an attack of opportunity from them. A few examples of this would include falling prone, standing up from prone, mounting a horse, or crawling. Declaring any of these or other actions that have the move trait may trigger an attack of opportunity. And the fourth possible trigger is the enemy moves out of its square during a move action that it is using. And this may sound the same as the previous trigger of using a move action, but the difference is the previous trigger refers to declaring a move action while in a threatened space. And this fourth possible trigger covers situations where a creature might declare a move action while outside of an enemy's threatened space, but then move through that threatened area. Typically, this will occur with stride actions, but may also happen with other forms of locomotion like swimming, flying, or climbing. Move actions trigger reactions not just when they are used, but again every time that creature leaves a square. So if you use stride starting outside of a threatened space, you do not trigger any attacks of opportunity then. And if you then move into a threatened space, you do not trigger anything then either, because movement triggers occur when leaving spaces, but if you then leave that threatened space, you may trigger attacks of opportunity. But note that you may never trigger more than one reaction per creature with a single move action, no matter how many threatened spaces you exit, even if that enemy creature has more than one reaction they can spend. Also be aware that the step action exists to allow creatures to move without triggering reactions. Step costs one action and you can only move 5 feet instead of your full speed, but you do not trigger attacks of opportunity when doing so. And last, note how this trigger is worded. It says, the enemy moves out of its space during a move action that it is using. Emphasis on that last part, during a move action that it is using. In other words, if the target moves out of one of your threatened spaces but doesn't use one of their own actions to do so, then that movement does not trigger attacks of opportunity. Basically, if they're forced out of their space by someone else's action, like a shove attack, then that movement does not trigger attacks of opportunity. When an attack of opportunity is provoked, the attacking character may spend their reaction that turn to make a melee strike against the provoking creature. As mentioned before, this attack is made using the attacking character's highest bonus and is not affected by or contribute to the multiple attack penalty. The strike is resolved as normal except if the result is a critical hit and the attack of opportunity was triggered by a manipulate action. If so, in those cases, that action is disrupted. When an action is disrupted, all resources and costs associated with the triggering action are still spent, but the effect of that action does not occur. For example, if you're a fighter and an enemy casts a spell that includes a somatic component while standing in one of your threatened spaces, you could spend your reaction that turn to make an attack of opportunity. If the result of that attack is a critical hit, then not only do you deal double damage as normal for a critical hit, but you also disrupt that spell from being cast. The enemy in this case still loses both actions they had invested in casting the spell, as well as the spell slot and any other costs that were invested in casting as usual, except the spell doesn't work, it has no effect. In some cases, it may be important to know exactly when the attack of opportunity occurs. For example, if a successful attack of opportunity results in killing an opponent, you may need to know in which square their body now occupies. If the attack of opportunity is triggered by an enemy moving out of a threatened space, then the attack of opportunity occurs immediately, effectively before they leave that space. If it occurred after that action was fully resolved, then the enemy would likely be out of range of that melee attack. So if an adjacent enemy uses the stride action to move out of their space, You do not wait for that action to completely resolve and may attack them immediately. But if the attack of opportunity is triggered by using a move action without leaving their space, then the enemy gets to fully resolve that action before the attack of opportunity occurs. For example, if an enemy stands from prone, they completely stand up before resolving your attack of opportunity. That covers my introduction to attacks of opportunity. Keep an eye out on my channel for a few upcoming rule reminder videos that will address specific cases and provide examples. And I also want to offer a big thanks to Scuba Steve from my Patreon, who was a big help in researching this topic. Before we close, I'd like to take a moment to thank all of my patrons. These videos would not be possible without their continued generosity and support. Members of the How It's Played Patreon community receive special benefits like exclusive content and getting to vote on the topics I cover. If you would like to support this channel and help it grow, the easiest way to do that is by subscribing and clicking the bell icon so you get notified when new videos release. And I can always be reached through Twitter and Facebook too. Thanks for watching, take care, and happy gaming!